Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
Episode 90, Part 2. Was Jack the Ripper in Australia? Warning, there is graphic information contained in this episode. I would highly suggest that you go back and listen to Part 1 if you haven't already done so, and I'd also suggest that you have a listen to the bonus episode relating to the Iberia gold robbery. This will give you the background and the relevance for the beginning of this episode. I'm going to start this episode by discussing briefly in mention to the Iberia gold robbery, in particular the information that was gleaned about Frederick Deeming's personal life at this time. Some of the accounts that were given: the robbery of 5,000 sovereigns from the Orient Company's SS Iberia in May 1889 has been awakened by the publication of an article in which the name of Williams has been mentioned. An interview of a most interesting character was held this afternoon by a reporter for the Herald, a gentleman from Williamstown, well known and prominently connected with shipping affairs. What was communicated to the reporter during the brief conversation established a considerable degree of interest. The gentleman said that he was well acquainted with Williams, who was engaged on the Iberia for a long time, and he was a very nice, agreeable sort of fellow, he seemed. It had been said that the man on board the Iberia was in the capacity of an engineer, but this was not so. He was chief steward of that vessel and made himself well liked by the kindness and gentle treatment, especially to children. At the time the Williamstown gentleman knew him, Deeming was a widower, and a steady-going, careful sort of fellow he appeared to be. There was a mention of a lady who had married Deeming up in Queensland, and on the 22nd of April 1890, there was an advertisement in the Brisbane Courier, and it says, "Wanted the address of George Denby, baker and confectioner, who arrived in Brisbane from London on the 5th of March 1889 by the RMS Jumna. He was married shortly after his arrival, but left his wife 5 days afterwards with the intention of going to Sydney to purchase some machinery. Any information as to his whereabouts will be thankfully received by his distressed wife. Address, Mrs. George Denby, care of Mrs. Lingley, Redland Bay Hotel near Brisbane." So we have this extra wife from Queensland still looking for him, and remember, we've had the Government Gazette notice and now we've got the ad. And this is also quite interesting due to the fact that there is now another wife that is about to be mentioned by the recollections of this man from Williamstown. On one occasion, while Deeming was in Port Jackson, he formed the acquaintance of a well-known lady in Sydney, and in the course of the time he married her. The honeymoon was celebrated by the husband bringing his wife to Melbourne. They saw the sights, and then his wife returned to Sydney. After she had left, Deeming waited on the gentleman to whom our reporter spoke and asked him to do a little favour. "I have a letter here for my wife," he said, "and as the boat is about to leave, I wish you would send it on to her at Sydney, together with my bank book. I have had a good passage round from Sydney, and by the sales I made to the passengers, I have done very well indeed." The gentleman consented to post the letter, and in a few days he received a reply dated on the 1st of April 1889 from Pine Tree House, Darling Street, Sydney. The letter contained thanks to the person whom the bank book and husband's letter had been sent, and was finished with the words, "Yours truly, Alice A. Williams." In the meantime, Deeming was performing his duties as chief steward on board the Iberia in mid-ocean. On the occasion of the return to Sydney of the Iberia, and when she left that port homeward bound, Williams took his wife on board, and they both left for London. This was a breach of the regulations. No officer is allowed to take his wife on board in the manner that was done in this instance, and when the Iberia pulled into port in London, Williams was compelled to withdraw from the service of the company. Bent on returning to the colonies, Williams and his wife came out as passengers, paying their own footing in another vessel. The vessel arrived on the 19th of July 1889. Mrs. Williams went on to Sydney, and Williams decided to go to Melbourne. But on the Sunday following the arrival of the English boat in Melbourne, on the 20th of July 1889, The startling discovery of the sovereigns sold from the Iberia was made by playful children under the Williamstown Railway Pier. Suspicion centred upon Williams, and it was supposed that the discovery of the coins caused him to change his intentions about travelling to Sydney by sea, and he took the train from Melbourne to Sydney a day or two later. Some weeks later, he determined upon settling down in Sydney and going into business. This resolve was carried into effect, and he went into a shop as a restaurant keeper. Being a well-known man to seafaring people, he was patronised in fairly liberal fashion by officers and seamen. But the business of an eating house keeper proved a troublesome affair, and finally the shop was shut up, having proved a failure. The informant added, "That is the last I heard of him for a long time. But 2 months ago, my little daughter was in Melbourne, and when she returned home at 9, informed me she'd seen Williams near the post office. He was well known to my daughter, and I asked her if she'd spoken to him. She said she had not and explained why. She wished to do so, as he'd been very kind and friendly towards her while he was on board the Iberia. He frequently gave her cakes and made himself a loved man amongst children. But she explained to me that Williams was speaking to a man, and he appeared to be very much worried and careworn, and she did not like to break in their conversation. Asked to give a description of the Iberia Williams, our informant said he was a man of 5'8", stout build and round-shouldered. He was clean-shaven on the chin and wore a light and rather long moustache. He spoke with a peculiar accent, quick and harsh or rather raspy. The tone resembled that of a Lancashire man as much as anything else, but not to a pronounced degree." So June 1889, he's in South Africa. Deeming reconnected with Grice, and Grice readily introduced him to his banker, who agreed to advance £3,500 upon the bogus deeds and Grice's personal security. The bank manager asked for references, and Deeming, being evidently prepared for this with cool audacity, gave the name of a well-known Cape Town banker and an address in Cape Town. To this address, the manager wired and received a most satisfactory reply in the name of the banker. This reply, as afterwards had been found, had been sent by the Confederate Deeming had left behind in Cape Town. The deeds were deposited, Grice signed the guarantee, and Deeming received £3,500. In the meantime, he hadn't been idle. He made very good use of his friendship with Ansell, from whom he purchased jewellery to the amount of £420. Ansell, knowing that £3,500 was being obtained from the bank, readily allowed him to have whatever he wanted. A few days afterwards, Deeming disappeared. The mining secretary and the jeweller, having their suspicions aroused, proceeded to make an investigation, when they discovered that all they had in the shape of security for nearly £4,000 was a bundle of worthless deeds, 2 boxes, and some articles of wearing apparel. It was also discovered that the Confederate with whom Deeming had been in regular communication at Cape Town had vanished, and though a warrant was issued for the arrest of the principal actor in the daring plot, it could not be executed, as Deeming was out of jurisdiction of the Transvaal Republic. The bank authorities, finding that the deeds deposited with them were of no value, called upon Grice to make good his guarantee, which he did, and it resulted in ruin for him. On the 19th of June 1889, there was a notice in the Police Gazette. Brisbane, Edward George Denby is charged on warrant issued by the Brisbane bench with deserting his wife Elizabeth, care of Edward Smith, Redland Bay, on the 18th. Description: an Englishman, a confectioner, 38 years of age, 5'4" high, stout build, broad-shouldered, sandy hair, beard and moustache, wore grey tweed suit, small black hard felt hat and lace-up boots, was last heard of at Sydney on the 4th of June 1889. So he's passing himself off as a confectioner. Once he has gone from South Africa, he's obviously come over back to Queensland again, and back to one of these wives that were recorded when he was living in the Rockhampton area back in 1883 to 1885. So the next time he's tracked is in September 1889, and he had been found to have sailed to England, and he arrived at Birkenhead and reunited with Marie and his 3 children. In October 1889, he passed himself off in Hull as Harry Dunn, a rich sheep farmer and a gold mine proprietor from Rockhampton, Queensland. An article stated that Deeming, with an elder and taller man, stayed at Chester in October 1889. While there, he bought a gun and ordered some cartridges to be sent to Mr. Lawson, care of Mrs. Matheson, Beverley. The receipt was sent on November the 17th and was signed G.F. Gray for H. Lawson. It was written on paper with a printed heading, Mount House Farm, Rockhampton, seat of H. Lawson. Deeming's accomplice at the Cape circulated a rumour that Deeming had died at Durban in 1889. So that's going back to that accomplice and the rumours that were circulated in South Africa, including those 2 tombstones that were erected at a cemetery in South Africa. So that's also leading to the theory that he tried to cover his tracks. In November 1889, he visited Beverley under the name of Harry Lawson. And here he also declared he was an Australian sheep farmer and he was buying rams for his station. He also declared that he was heir to the Nafferton property. He stayed at a hotel called the Forester's Arms, and while there he offered marriage to the landlady, who had then been recently widowed. He also offered to provide for her children if she married him, and showed that he was in possession of a sum of £300, but she refused his overtures. He, however, returned 2 years later and renewed overtures of marriage, which were then accepted, and matters proceeding so far that the wedding dress was provided, but the lady, finding one of his statements was untrue, dismissed him before the day fixed for the wedding. So by 1889, it appears that Marie and Frederick became estranged. Marie settled in Birkenhead while Frederick rented in Beverley near Hull under the name Harry Dunn. Soon after Frederick's arrival in Beverley, he became a suitor for the hand of Miss Helen Nellie Matheson. She was a Scottish girl, and he represented himself as Harry Lawson, a retired sheep farmer from Mount House Farm, Rockhampton, Queensland, and he stated he was living on £1,500 a year. He also said he was the nephew of Sir Wilfrid Lawson, the temperance advocate, by whom he said he'd been educated. Deeming was arrested at Hull for obtaining jewellery by valueless cheques to the total of £285. He escaped to Montevideo, where he was arrested and brought back to England, and he was sentenced to 9 months in prison. On the 10th of July 1891, while Deeming is in jail, Marie gives birth to their 4th child, Lilla. Henry Webster, the late governor of the HM prison at Hull in England, was actually called out to Australia when he was arrested and jailed in Melbourne, and he recollected what had occurred at this time. It said sometime in August or early in September 1890, a man named Harry Lawson was committed to my custody on a charge of obtaining a diamond necklace and rings from a jeweller in Hull. He absconded immediately on obtaining the jewellery, and the detective officer was sent to Montevideo, and Lawson was apprehended there and brought back to Hull under the extradition laws. Some letters addressed for Lawson were handed to the officer, and these proved to be from his wife, who was living at Liverpool. This was the first intimation that Lawson was a married man before coming to Hull. He first appeared at Beverley in the East Riding of Yorkshire, a small town about 8 miles from Hull, and succeeded in persuading a widow with 2 daughters to take him into her house as a lodger, representing himself as wealthy and just returning from the Cape. During the time he was in Beverley, he made a great show, driving a hired conveyance into Hull, generally instead of going by train. On the day that he absconded from Hull, he called the bank. He closed his account there, taking out a few pounds balance, and then after the bank was closed, he went to the jeweller's, inquiring about the necklace, which he had looked at several times before. He bought the necklace, paying with a cheque from the same bank, the amount being £130. He then purchased 2 or 3 diamond rings, for which he gave another cheque, saying that only the first cheque was to be presented on Monday, but by Tuesday there would be a remittance to his account. On inquiring at the bank on the Monday, it was found that there was nothing to meet these purchases and the account was closed. Lawson was tried for this fraud on the 17th of October 1890 at the Hull Quarter Sessions. It was proved he left Hull by train within an hour or 2 of obtaining the jewellery and had arranged some weeks previously for his baggage to be ready on that day. He booked a passage to Buenos Aires, and although the vessel was full, he pressed for passage, stating it was important he should go. When arrested, he had a quantity of diamonds upon him, 72 of one sort and 18 of another, and it was proved that the necklace that contained 72 diamonds was exactly similar to those that were found on him. When in the prison at Hull, Lawson was visited by his wife, Mrs. Deeming. She first told me she was his cousin, but after the visit, I questioned her and she said that she was his wife and they had 4 children and they were living at Liverpool. During the time he was in prison, several times he feigned illness, fainting, having fits, losing his sight, and was continually applying to the medical officer to be out of his cell, or complaining of some ailment, but nothing was found to be the matter with him. He's very sharp and cunning, he always has his wits about him, and there is nothing at all to indicate any trace of insanity. He's thoroughly untruthful and up to every kind of scheme and dodge. He refused to be photographed, but I had him taken by a detection camera. We, however, failed to trace him in any English prisons, though I was quite sure that he was an old prison bird, and that was the opinion of all my officers. A gentleman from Bedford called to see him before his trial, and Lawson declared all through the interview that he had never seen him before and did not know him, that he was entirely mistaken, and when shown a letter in his own handwriting, he denied it was his and knew nothing about it. He told Lawson that he'd robbed him out of thousands of pounds, and when he got him to Johannesburg, it would be many a year before he got away, as he would prosecute him. When Lawson replied, "If you get there, you'll never get away again." Notwithstanding his protestations that he did not know the gentleman, the following morning he asked me to allow him to write to him, as he'd remembered that this gentleman owed him several £1,000s, and in the letter said that if the money was not remitted within a few days, he would issue a writ. I visited Frederick Deeming, alias Williams, in Jarley, Melbourne, and identified him as the man Harry Lawson who had served 9 months in the prison in Hull. He stated he did not know me and he intended to answer no questions. Shortly before his discharge, he wrote a letter to Miss Matheson stating that there was no truth in the report that he was married and that he should be able to prove that he neither had a wife nor a family very shortly after he got out of prison. Deeming obtained Helen Matheson's mother's consent to marry her, although her friends, who were highly respectable, suggested that she should wait until inquiries were made as to Lawson's statements, and he gave Miss Matheson several presents of jewellery, which he had bought at that jeweller's shop. At this time he left frequently on short visits, some of which were to the northern racecourses, where he was known as Wilson, a notorious Welsher, and he claimed that he was a wool king. There was another account that he rented a lonely villa at Mould in Flintshire, North Wales. And while he was in Antwerp, he showed his creditors a telegram announcing the burning of his castle in England, including his racing stud. He wired Helen Matheson to join him there, but he forgot to append his address, and the telegraph messengers were several days searching for him, and it was found he was engaged in an intrigue with a woman in a low quarter of the town. He had an accident in Antwerp, and he returned to Beverley and was nursed back to health by Mrs. Matheson and Miss Matheson. By the 18th of February 1890, Deeming married Helen Matheson, and this was a bigamous marriage. So Helen was 21 and Frederick 37 at this time. They spent their honeymoon in the south of England. He proceeded to do a number of bag snatches, and he stole a portmanteau at a railway station. He visited Gosport in March 1890 under the name of Lawson, and it does say that he was in the company with a woman, and together they lived extravagantly at the hotel, but when they left, a worthless cheque was given in payment of their expenses. There was also a detailed account outlining Deeming's time in West Hartlepool. And it says a sensation has been created in West Hartlepool by the discovery just made that Deeming was sometime a resident of that town, where he passed by the name of Lawson. He made the acquaintance of 2 prominent merchants of the place, with whom he stayed for some weeks, representing himself to be an Australian millionaire, the deception being assisted by an imposing display of diamonds and a free expenditure of cash. He represented that he was building a yacht at Hull and was about to establish a large business at Plymouth, of which he intended to appoint as manager one of his West Hartlepool friends. This was around the time of his marriage to the young lady at Beverley. The marriage ceremony was attended by one of the West Hartlepool merchants who acted as best man. A Hull correspondent states that Deeming told the captain of the Wilson liner Zebra that he was the son of poor parents who went to Australia when he was a boy, that he had been fortunate at the gold diggings, and he had risen to be a sheep farmer and racehorse breeder, owning extensive estates at Rockhampton, a gold mine, and many other sources of wealth. In fact, he was a millionaire. While staying at Antwerp, whither the Zebra conveyed him, Williams, before going out with a companion one day, put his hand into a black Gladstone bag full of sovereigns and drew forth 2 handfuls, saying, "I think that will be enough for one night's spree." While at Antwerp, he visited many art studios where he made extensive purchases, mostly on credit, and these were ordered to be sent on to England, and he signed the ship's register as Harry Dunn. The Bedford Chief Constable holds a warrant for the arrest of Deeming, who had been wanted for some time for having defrauded a Bedford gentleman. In late 1890, he was then known by the name of Lawson and obtained a large sum of money from this gentleman through representing himself as being connected with some mining concerns. Lawson's photo and several letters are in the Chief Constable's possession. After spending 3 weeks in the south of England on their honeymoon, they returned to Beverley at the beginning of March. They were put up at the Station Hotel on the 15th of March, and he left her in the hotel saying he was going to get shaved and should soon be back, and he disappeared. He took all their wedding gifts, all the money, and her wedding ring and trousseau. So how he managed to do this? He persuaded Helen to leave all her luggage, except a few necessities, in London. And when it was discovered that he decamped, he went back and collected that luggage. How he took her wedding ring? Well, he said that he did not think it was a good fit, and he promised to get her a better one. He engaged his berth on the ship for South America under the name of Deeming, and he took his passage out before he was married, so it was evident that he already had planned this well in advance. Before he left, he actually visited Marie and the 4 children at Birkenhead. He told his wife he was going to South America in the following months and he would send for them, and he gave them several £100s. And another account said that it was asserted that he was living in a hotel in Liverpool. He gave out that he owned a gold mine in Australia and he belonged to the Corps of Mounted Rifles, which had performed signal service in the Australian bush. He showed the uniform he'd worn and exhibited plenty of money. He twice offered to marry the landlady of the hotel, who possessed money, but she declined his offer. It was also reported that Deeming at one time lived at Devonport with a young lady from the Channel Islands, who he passed off as his wife. So on his voyage to Montevideo in about September 1890, on the ship he represented himself as a director of diamond mines. He presided at the table and organised concerts, and he even got up subscriptions for charitable purposes. Miss Matheson then proceeded to prosecute him for bigamy, but by the extradition laws of Uruguay, a criminal can only be tried for the offence with which he is charged when first taken into custody. Therefore, Miss Matheson was prevented from charging Deeming. Had she been able to do so, it would have prevented what was about to occur. The man who was swindled in the jewellery heist in South Africa went to look for Deeming, and he visited Helen Matheson, and she informed him that Lawson's lawyer was drawing up papers for a nullity of marriage to save him from being arrested as a bigamist. She was informed that Lawson must still have a considerable sum of money, and it was advised not to sign any paperwork until a substantial sum was handed over to her. It is not known whether she did adhere to this determination. So on the 6th of July 1891, in jail, Deeming sent his wife a letter of reconciliation, reaffirming his affections and pledging to send for them once he found a suitable home and employment. To assist him, she sent him £100 that she'd saved for a rainy day. On the 15th of July, Deeming leaves Hull Prison, and after remaining a few days in Hull, he now tries to meet Miss Matheson. He left for Birkenhead. He acknowledged to his wife that he had married Miss Matheson in Hull and asked his wife that in case the subject was brought up to deny that she was his wife. Marie consulted her sister Martha, and she refused to lie for him, and then Deeming again periodically absented himself. He went to Liverpool under the alias of John Taylor, where he forged cheques and courted a young woman, giving her splendid presents of jewellery, which was since discovered to be spurious. In July 1891, he arrived at Rainhill from Liverpool. He used the name Albert Williams, and he established himself at the Commercial Hotel. He arrived in a travel-stained condition. He had little luggage with him, hired a bedroom, and he was once visited by a lady that he described as his sister, but she was not seen again. He then rented a home in Dinham Villa, and he paid 6 months' rent in advance. He signed an agreement on behalf of one Mr. Baron Brooks, containing this extraordinary clause. The said Albert Oliver Williams agrees to cover the whole of the stone floors with 1.5 inches of fine cement within a month after taking the villa. The agreement was signed on the 23rd of July 1891, and Deeming at once proceeded to buy furniture from Ray and Miles of London Road, Liverpool. He met the Mathers, Mrs. Mather and her daughter Emily Mather, and he told Emily Mather's mother that Denham Villa was the home of his employer, a Colonel Brooks, who was supposed to have been arriving from India shortly. However, the Colonel never arrived. Mrs. Mather said that Williams represented himself as the son of a Colonel Williams, who had been killed in the Crimean War, and that he was well known to Mr. Jack Brunskill, who was employed in the War Office. He also represented himself as an inspector of stores in the Indian Army or Bengal Cavalry and had been wounded in war. And Mrs. Mather said he always appeared to have plenty of money. Interestingly, there were many robberies committed in the vicinity of Rainhill and St Helens in that year. So in August 1891, Marie learnt that he'd taken a house in Rainhill, and after various bickerings with him, when he visited his Birkenhead establishment, Marie, together with the 4 children, joined him at Rainhill unexpectedly. Williams told neighbours that his sister and her children were visiting him, and Marie and the children vanished soon after their arrival. Deeming's brothers and Marie's sister had been led to believe that Marie and the children were in Brighton on a holiday, and then they assumed that they went overseas again. Deeming had made several visits to Birkenhead to reassure her sister Martha that her sister and nieces and nephew were well. He told people that his sister and her children had gone to Point Said to meet her husband. On the 3rd of August, Deeming disposed of the furniture he had bought and returned to the hotel that he'd previously stayed at and asked for his old rooms, the commercial hotel, on the grounds that he could not sleep at his house alone. The landlord of the commercial hotel, he noticed that Deeming's coat was splattered with blood when he returned there after spending 2 nights at Denham Villa around the time of the murder. And it was noticed that he was often away from Rainhill. Before leaving the hotel, he asked for his bill and was told that it should be brought to him at the villa, but to this he objected, indicating that he did not wish to see the landlord at his house. Mr. Short, the landlord, had more than once before the woman's arrival been to the villa and had stayed there drinking with Williams at the request of him. On the 7th of August 1891, this is presumed the date that Deeming actually murdered Marie and the 4 children. The detection of the murder straight away was obstructed by Deeming's lease that he stated, where the house should not be sold or relet for 6 months because of the imminent arrival of Colonel Brooks and or his sister. On the 11th of August 1891, Deeming complained that the drains at Denham Villa were defective and the kitchen floor needed to be replaced. He convinced the owner that the floors needed cementing, and he spent days digging and packing telltale earth into travel trunks for later disposal. He was smoking and drinking wine for refreshments during this task. In the meantime, he was courting Miss Mather, and he had bought 4 barrels of cement in Liverpool, paying for them under her name. A plasterer was employed to complete the cementing of the hearth, and a charwoman complained of the smell of chloride of lime about the place. He placed the chloride of lime on the bodies intending to destroy them, but it had a contrary effect. It actually preserved them for a longer period, and by this act, he actually provided evidence of his crime. On the 14th of August, he left for London. He turned up on the 28th of August at Armfields Hotel, South Place, London, signing the visitor's book as A.O. Williams of Manchester. Meanwhile, on the 14th of August, he engaged a local man to remove 4 or 5 heavy boxes from the villa, which were labelled for some Mrs. Hold's railway station, Plymouth, and they contain a large wardrobe of women's and children's apparel, some of them blood-stained. And it's also at this time where it was recorded earlier that he had returned to the widow at Beverley at the Foresters Arms, asking again for her to marry him, which luckily for her, she second-guessed and it didn't eventuate. So not only is he courting Emily Mather, he's also gone back to see whether the widow at Beverley would actually accept his hand in marriage. On the 28th of August 1891, he's masquerading as a soldier. He returned to Rainhill and he astounded the villagers by appearing in a full uniform with sword. What regiment the uniform represented, nobody could guess. It was a light blue tunic and dark trousers, so it hardly suggested the British Army. Remarks were at once made suggesting that it belonged to a French army regiment, while its faded and moth-eaten state looked suspiciously as if it had been picked up second-hand, and apparently he was well supplied with money. He banqueted 17 of the villagers and then announced he was intending to marry Miss Mather. He showed money, diamonds, and several times appeared in his military uniform. He then went to lodge with the Mathers, and on the 22nd of September 1891, as Albert Oliver Williams, he married Emily Lydia Mather at Rainhill. Emily was 26, Frederick 38. He actually stated he was 36 on the marriage certificate. He listed his occupation as an inspector of army stores. The marriage was solemnised at 8 o'clock in the morning at the Rainhill Parish Church. After the marriage took place, they celebrated, and the dances and celebrations took place at Denham Villa, the villagers being completely unaware of what was under the floor. And immediately afterwards, that same day actually, the newly married couple left for London. On their honeymoon, they visited Hastings, amongst other places, and he swindled a publican there to the extent of £30. They stayed with distant relatives of Emily Mathers when they were at Hastings, and he described himself to the family as a major general and displayed many valuables, including a gold striking watch, which those who saw it valued at about £100. This and other articles were given to him, he said, by his brother officers. Their stay in Hastings was the second half of the honeymoon, the first part in which Miss Mather said was spent in a hotel in Finsbury Square in London. One of the family said that Miss Mather told her friends that during her stay at Finsbury Square, her husband sent some stained female garments to a laundress, and in reply to his wife, Deeming stated that it was usual for officers who, like himself, were going to India to possess them in case of an emergency arising. On the 2nd of November 1891, Emily and Frederick left by the Kaiser Wilhelm II at Southampton for Melbourne as second-class passengers. And there was a letter from a lady who was on board the vessel with Williams, as he was known at that point, and his wife, and told her husband had turned out a villain and had treated her brutally, that he showed his true character even during the honeymoon in London. So piteous was her experience during the voyage that she determined to separate from him and return to England. Accordingly, assistance was procured to her by the writer, and she took out her passage to come back to England from Melbourne, but her husband would not allow her to escape his watchfulness, and though she got on board the steamer bound for England, he followed her and forced her to go back ashore with him. Mrs. Mather stated that she received letters from her daughter that were posted at each port, and the last letter she got from her daughter was from Colombia. So on the 15th of December 1891, they arrived in Melbourne. They initially stayed at the Federal Coffee Palace, and he used the name Albert Williams. And there are some accounts that were made in gathering evidence for the trial of people that were on the boat with them, and it gave a little bit of an insight into his character. Sydney John Oakes states, "I am a corn merchant residing at Elphelton. I have recently been to Europe. I left Southampton on the 2nd of November last for Melbourne, where I arrived on the 15th of December. I knew among the passengers Mr. and Mrs. Williams on the vessel Kaiser Wilhelm II that disembarked at Melbourne. I knew them well. Mr. Williams's manner towards his wife was always kind and affectionate. His Christian name was Albert, and the deceased's Emily. At least that's how they addressed one another whilst on board the steamer. I last saw him on the 6th of January in Burke Street. I had a drink with him at the Baths Hotel, Burke Street, close to where I met him. He promised to come out and see me, and he took my address down in his pocketbook. He never came. Whilst having our drinks, he told me that he got a billet to India as inspecting engineer under the government at a salary of £1,000 per annum. He said he was going to sail for India on the following Saturday, on the 16th of January. On the voyage out, he informed me that he had been an inspecting engineer for 19 years in the Royal Navy and was drawing a pension." And a letter from Kate Jensen. She was living in Brisbane at the time she wrote the letter around the trial. She said, "Sir, I was a passenger on board the Kaiser Wilhelm, my cabin being opposite his during the first 3 weeks of the voyage. I had many opportunities of observing him. Often as I lay in my berth, I heard him carrying on an extraordinary conversation with his canary as if it was a human being. In the presence of his wife, I saw him brandish a knife, exclaiming, 'I have killed many Zulus with this.' At Suez, on his return to the vessel from the shore, he held up a small saw in the presence of myself and several other passengers and said, "This is a very useful instrument. I have just half sawn a man's hand off." Although posing as a very religious man, he openly boasted of stealing pearls from a blackfellow. After leaving Adelaide, he indirectly accused me of stealing a very valuable necklace from his wife. When leaving the vessel at Melbourne, his countenance was unusually pale and haggard. This I then attributed to the vexation on his part at being shunned by the other passengers on account of the accusations he had made against them, but I now think a fit of madness was coming on him and he was trying to control it. I believe all the passengers will agree with me that during the voyage he treated his wife with great kindness and consideration. They seemed very much attached to each other, and she spoke to me of him in the most affectionate terms. At the same time, she referred to his excitable and restless nature and told me he was most anxious to reach Melbourne. His conduct on board the vessel then convinced me that he was a madman, and before the murder was known, I described him as such. And Max Hirschfeld stated that he was a draper living at Balaclava, and he said he arrived in Victoria on the 15th of December. He came by the Kaiser Wilhelm, and he sailed from the port of Bremen. We called at Southampton on the 1st of November, and among the passengers taken on board were Mr. and Mrs. Williams. They left the vessel at Port Melbourne. Williams made various remarks about where he was going. He said he had £6,000 or £7,000 that he was going to invest in Victoria. He stated that on the passage out, Williams was the greatest psalm singer imaginable. He went in for full salvation, particularly on the Sabbath, sang louder and prayed harder than anyone else, and was altogether more godly than the rest of the ship put together. He even discountenanced a dance that was to have taken place, but his saintly professions did not appear to prevent him ill-treating his wife. He said that he saw Williams on several occasions after they landed, but not Mrs. Williams. During the voyage, he accused a lady passenger of stealing a necklace valued at £100 from his wife, and was himself accused of stealing pearls from 2 of the ship's crew. He also took up a collection for a poor woman on board and kept the proceeds until he was forced to hand them over to her. So now Frederick and Emily have arrived in Melbourne. In the next episode, I'm going to fill you in on what eventuated in Melbourne and also give further details as to the crime that was committed in England against his wife and children.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes